Lily.
Let's get to Brody Miller, who is got a great write-up over at The Athletic, as if you are looking for the latest on LSU's offseason. It is titled LSU's Football Offseason To-Do List, what Brian Kelly and his staff must focus on before the 2022 season opener, as LSU has now had the 2021 season behind them with the Texas Bowl the other night coming and going, and LSU getting blown out 42-20 against Kansas State. What now? As we bring in Brody Miller from The Athletic. You can follow Brody on Twitter at Brody A. Miller and catch all of his work over at The Athletic. Happy New Year, man. Good morning. How are you?
Happy New Year to you, man. I'm doing all right. How about yourself?
Doing good. We said after the Tuesday night game on Wednesday morning yesterday, we were talking that it really now officially feels like this is Brian Kelly's program. I know that he was named the head coach a couple of weeks back and has been on the job for a couple of weeks, and he's had that head coaching office. But it really feels like now he's in firm control of this program, and it's really everything that's coming in and going out is going to be his decision. I know that you've got a write-up over at the Athletic. What would you see being the first job that Kelly has to dive into here to begin this overhaul?
Well, and it's not as much in there, to be honest, but unfortunately, I think the first thing we're kind of seeing yesterday in the last few days and weeks, and it's a little bit of cleaning house. I mean, we expected a lot of on-field staff changes. That's just normal when you have a new head coach. But from what I've gathered, Kelly spent the last few weeks kind of evaluating the building, support staff, operations people, all that kind of stuff, and kind of evaluating. And what ended up happening yesterday was somewhat a cleaning of house. It really was, people who've been there a long time, operations people, sports staffers, analysts, so many just are not coming back now. So, and overwhelming amount. So from what I gathered, he kind of looked around and said that he doesn't really think he wasn't overly impressed, which is unfortunate, he is going to be rebuilding that completely in his own. And in some ways, some would argue that's what LSU needs, and in others, it's a tricky subject. But I think you start there, and that's obviously going to be big the next few weeks, is building that, but that's not exactly the sexy part of building a program. The other thing is certainly the transfer portal. He's something he talks about at ESPN, and that is going to be, especially this year where you were allowed to take 7, to match the guys that are gone. That is 7 over the limit. You can get as many as 32 players. It's going to be a massive. And it seems like Brian Polian has kind of been tasked as the transfer portal guy there to kind of, he's been the one offering a lot of people. And you're seeing them go for receivers, D linemen, linebackers. Obviously, offensive line is the number one target. I wouldn't be surprised if they get 2 or 3, but I think that's priority number 1. They need to kind of look through what Michigan State did a little bit last year, right, where they patched the program really, really, really well with the portal, kind of got a little bit of a stopgap. But the recruiting, high school recruiting is going to be the future, but in the short term, portal is going to be huge.
What did you learn about Brad Davis and covering him in the interim?
I think you learn he's a guy who takes an immense amount of pride in this job. We all made a big thing of him being a Baton Rouge guy who wanted to come home when he took this job, and I think that rang even truer these last few weeks and months. And I think he's a very principled man. I think you could see the way he handled things, the way he was like, hey, we're going to fight anyway, the way he was unbelievably apologetic about the loss. I think he's a guy who has a lot of principles, and that's something I gathered throughout, even the season as just the offensive line coaches. He's a guy who is like, hey guys, this is my town. You can't, we can't take a step. We can't be a step behind. We need to be on top of this. And I think he's a tough guy who's going to be hard on them. So I am high on him as an offensive line coach. I do think he's somebody who was clearly on the way to come up anyway, and he's now pretty much the only guy, it appears, that Brian Kelly might be keeping on.
Do you think that there's a fair timeline when you see the numbers that LSU competes in a bowl game at the end of the 2021 season to put on having the roster restored? Because, I mean, it's, as college football is concerned, it's dire, right? I mean, it's almost in shambles. Or is it?
You mean in terms of Brian Kelly kind of building it back up this year?
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, I don't think you can really get it back to to normal this year, right? I think it's going to be a multi-year process. I mean, even right now, you look at, they only have 13 signings right now, and yeah, there's probably Matthews and Citizen are two huge ones they're hoping to get, and things like that. But even that puts you at 15, so it's like I don't even know if they're filling all 25 spots this year, things like that. So I think it has to be, and you can't overdo it with the portal, because then you're unbalancing your roster, and then you're putting yourself in even more of a short-term fix. You do have to find that balance. So I would assume they're going to kind of leave some slots open a little bit, patch some holes, but also make sure you're not mortgaging your future too much. So I think it's a multi-year process. As you know, that roster management situation is dire, but it's tricky, right? Because there's so many shiny pieces at the top. There's so many super talented guys, but it's just not a complete roster. It's not a roster where, you know, one senior leaves and the next right guard's ready to go. That's just the part that's missing.
You mentioned Polian and where he may be tasked with kind of overseeing the portal and going after those commitments and recruits. It feels next to Frank Wilson that he comes in with the highest reputation of a recruiter. What have you learned, or if anything, about Polian up to this point, who is now LSU special teams coordinator?
Yeah, I think Polian's somebody with a long track record of being a good recruiter, even as a head coach at Nevada, right? And you know, it is worth noting that when Marcus Freeman was hired at Notre Dame, he kind of did take over the recruiting aspect, you know, at Notre Dame last fall, and they ended up having this elite class. Polian is the guy who Kelly has trusted, obviously, for a long time, and definitely is not afraid to hand him keys to some things, you know, and he does have a good track record as a recruiter over a long period of time. So I do think that it was notable. I think that the two first on-field hires they made were Polian and Wilson, which I kind of view as his two capos, you know, like his guys that are kind of his co-head coaches a little bit, that can help him oversee. And the scheme hires didn't come later, but those are the guys who manage the team, right? The guys who are going to help recruit and all that stuff. So I'm not going to sit here and say Polian's, you know, necessarily going to come in and be Frank Wilson, but I do think he has a trusted role in that department.
His underbosses. We get it.
yes, that's it. That's better. That's a compliment.
Jamar Cain, this seems like a big get for LSU as a defensive line coach. It was very much celebrated, at least on social media, but the story of keeping him away from USC and now getting him to Baton Rouge was a pretty good get for Kelly, right?
Absolutely. I mean, he's somebody who was highly sought after. Obviously, it's no secret he was headed to USC. And credit where it's due. I mean, it's 2 years at Oklahoma. I mean, we all remember what that defense was for so long, and I think that defense really doesn't get enough credit for kind of what it's been the last few years and how it's improved, at least under Grinch. It's gone under Alex Grinch. It's become a feisty unit, and a large part of that is what you know, Jamar Cain has done with that pass rush. It's not necessarily one that's going to rank in the top of compared with Alabama, but it's one that causes havoc. It makes life difficult for you. So he's really good there, and he's a good recruiter. So I think Jamar Cain is a heck of a steal there, and I think it proves kind of what, you know, an indication for a while that LSU's they're gonna outbid some people for assistants, because they know they kind of needed to. As soon as they didn't get Tommy Reese and Marcus Freeman, it was kind of like, all right, you know, we're gonna spend some money and get who we got to get. And Jamar Cain's obviously one of the better up and coming gets. So having him and Brad Davis on your O line and our D line, I feel like you have two guys who, you know, are really going to grow into being top tier assistants.
Where's your head? What do you see in that quarterback room over the next 12 months?
Yeah, you know, I always admit when it's not necessarily going off deep information, but just gut feel. It seems like Miles Brennan didn't come back to not be the starter. I don't think it's handed to him, of course, but I think it is a competition. Kelly said as much Tuesday. I mean, Nussmeier's a guy who could totally take a huge leap in year two. I mean, he's a massive talent. And I always got the sense Walker Howard was okay with redshirting this year, that, you know, he's somebody who's thinking big picture, and he's not going like, oh my God, I'm not starting, I'm going to transfer. So I think Brennan was brought in to kind of be this perfect bridge for Brian Kelly. No one's expecting them to win the SEC this year. You know, they're expecting them to keep things stable, maybe get back to that 9-win range, 10-win range if you're great, you know. And I think Miles Brennan is that perfect bridge. He's a good leader. People do respect him. And if he can stay healthy, he's got to average 370 passing yards a game, you know, in SEC ball. So I envision Brennan kind of being that stopgap, and then in 2023 you have that kind of ideal battle LSU fans are waiting for a long time with Nussmeier and Howard. I think that's the ideal situation. Things don't always work in ideals, so I wouldn't be, you know, I think it does kind of work both ways though, where if God forbid Brennan does have more injury problems, it's not like Nussmeier or even Howard aren't good enough to play in the SEC. So I do think Brennan coming back just fixes so much, just in terms of not making you panic, not making you waste a spot in the transfer portal, and also for him getting a chance to finally kind of show what he can do.
How big, how massive does that first Wednesday in February have to be for LSU?
Pretty big, just because obviously, December did not go to plan, and I'm not going to sit here and blame him for that. I actually don't think you can really blame him for much of that. That's not really on him. They were behind on a lot of these guys well before that hire. But I do think December was a frustrating week for them, and now all of a sudden, you have a bunch of spots to fill, and you have two huge Louisiana prospects in Jacoby Matthews and Javonte Sis, and that, if you don't get that, that's all of a sudden is a bad look, And it was a huge success for them, getting them to hold off, getting them to wait till February. That bought them more time, and maybe they can make up and get them. And then after that, they're going to have to, fill a lot more spots. And I'll be honest, I haven't talked to how many they actually plan on filling and some of the other main targets. But, I think he needs to kind of win some good graces over, and also just on the field. They need to get some more talent in that room for sure.
Great to catch up with you, man. Great start to a new year. Happy New Year to you. Make sure you follow Brody on Twitter at Brody A. Miller. And the latest read over at The Athletic, which I believe was published about 2 hours ago, is a really good look at the tasks of LSU's offseason under Brian Kelly now that he's in control. Thank you, man. We'll be touching base soon.
Thanks as always. Take care, guys.
All right, see you. There's Brody Miller checking in this morning.